Hey everyone, welcome back to The Conscious Entrepreneur. Today I'm sitting down with someone who's been through it all as a founder, Wil Schroter. Will's journey is really impressive. He's built 9 companies, sold 5, acquired 6, and is the founder of startups.com, where he has helped thousands of entrepreneurs navigate the ups and downs of creating something from nothing. In this conversation, we're tackling a big and meaningful question. Does success, which is, those exits, funding rounds, or other big wins, actually fix the struggles that we face as founders? Wil doesn't think so. Instead, he believes that the real work is creating a life that you want to live right now, not someday when the dust settles. We talk about his early days as a teenage founder, the hard lessons he's learned about scaling too fast, and the deeply personal principles that shape him and how he works today. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by the grind or wondered if there's a better way to balance ambition and well-being, this episode is going to be something you really appreciate. So let's dive in with Wil Schroter. Hey, Wil, thanks so much for joining us here today. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Let's get into it.
Yeah, so we cover so many topics on the Conscious Entrepreneur podcast. It's all about the inner journey of the entrepreneur, as you know, and really the thought about how to make sure you're not sacrificing yourself as you're out there building your business. And these are big themes for you in your work. They're big things for you and Ryan in your podcast, Startup Therapy. And one of the things I really wanted to talk to you about today is something we have not spent a lot of time on in this podcast, which is, what does success really look like? And so I know that you're someone who's got a very deep background in the startup world. You've started a number of companies, you've acquired companies, you've run this incredible platform and accelerator. And so you're someone who's experienced a lot of success. And at the same time, when I look at your writings and your work on LinkedIn, for example, or listen to the podcast and the other stuff that you talk about, you've got a really particular view on success. And so I thought, I'd love to just start out with when you were early in your career, when you were just starting your businesses, what did you think success was going to look like? What did it wind up actually looking like? What changed for you along the way around how you think about success?
Yeah, well, it didn't start off well. Let's just say my trajectory was very low. If you had a most likely to succeed, in high school, I was whatever the opposite of that. I was no, most likely to be incarcerated. I graduated at the bottom of my class in high school. I got rejected from every college I applied to. Things weren't going well, right? I had 2 full-time jobs coming out of high school while I was still in high school. And during the day, I was a telemarketer. I was making 100 phone calls a day selling mainframe computers, to give you an idea how old I am, right? And at night, I was making sandwiches at the equivalent of a Subway till 1 a.m. And so at no point there was I like, oh, this is going well. More so, I was like, my bar is so low. If I remember when my manager bumped me up from $5 an hour to $6 an hour, I thought I had won the lottery.
20% pay rise.
Yeah. And I was so excited about it. But, funny things happen in life. A couple years later, not even that long, I was 19. I started one of the first internet companies, one of the first interactive agencies, building some of what's so weird to say, some of the first websites on the internet. And who would have guessed that this one skill that I had no idea that anybody else didn't have, which was building a web page in 1993, 1994, would turn into what was a $700 million company. And so from my standpoint, when we talk about success, I think it's important to understand what your expectations were. Mine, I planned on working construction. That was my goal. My dad was a carpenter. It's all I want to do, which is ironic because now that my career has gone well, it's all I do for a hobby is build. I'm building a new house right now, and I'm at the construction site every day. I'm building nonstop. But to put this in perspective, it really stemmed from my happiness and my sense of success stemmed from I didn't expect any of it. So anything that happened felt like a giant win.
Yeah, there's this concept that if you're always out there chasing success, you're never going to find it. It's just like happiness. If you're chasing happiness, that's not the goal. The goal is happiness and success are the result of work that we're doing that we love. There's so many misconceptions about this. One of the ones that I see entrepreneurs falling into all the time is this thought of like, oh, well, once I'm successful, once I've checked whatever box or hit the milestone or, what have you, then I'm going to allow myself to finally live the life of my dreams or finally do X, Y, Z, type of thing, which is just so ass backward for people because they don't realize that we're living in a very finite journey here on earth, right?
Yeah, it's a couple things. I think one of the things is when you don't have stuff, when you don't have a life mate, when you don't have money, when you don't have things, okay? It's easy to point your problems at those things. I'm not happy because of those things. What I've come to find is you're not going to be happy when you get them either, right? Happiness, what a lot of people describe happiness to mean is safety. They're really talking about safety. And safety is happiness in its own right. Right. I mean, it's hard to feel happy and unsafe at the same time. Not impossible. I lived most of my life that way. But I was just generally a happy guy. Like even when I grew up poor, I wasn't like sitting around going, oh, I'm so miserable because I'm poor. I was just living my life. I was a happy kid. We had nothing, but I was a happy kid. But what I found in working with what's essentially now thousands of founders over the past 30 or so years is that they all go through the same gauntlet, and it's bullshit every single time. And you almost have to go through it to find it. They go into this idea that if I build something, ideally it has a big outcome. Like if I sold something, there's happiness on the other side. I can tell you what's on the other side. Safety. There's more money, right? You're more safe. But in 99% of the cases of all the founders that I talk to, and I'm talking about with people with 9-figure outcomes, they are less happy or almost more disappointed that happiness didn't exist. It didn't increase anything on the other side in almost every case.
Yeah, you posted something on LinkedIn recently, basically saying, success isn't a full-time job. And right. at the end of it, you're still you. And what I took to mean from that, I want to hear what you thought, but what I took to mean from that is like success is a thing that happens and that occurs, but we don't get to live there. Like you don't get to move into you don't get to stay in that state. You're in this bag of flesh, if you will, in this bag of thoughts, and that one exists no matter what your bank account says. 100%.
I'll give you an example. Again, as I've mentioned, I've had lots and lots of friends have just geometric exits, and they all go through the same routine. They all go through this moment where, like, let's say the thing sells or they have an IPO, et cetera. And there's this relief because, I was wondering if I was going to get to the finish line, and I got to the finish line. It's exactly what you see the expression on the runner's face when they break through the ribbon at the end of the marathon, right? It's yes. And then here's the part that nobody talks about. It's not in the brochure. Then they're like, well, what now? I mean, because what we think happens is money falls out of the sky, and we build a Scrooge McDuck vault of cash, and we swim in it every day and roil on our success. That is not at all how it happens. Here's what actually happens almost every single time. We hit that milestone, and then within days, weeks, maybe a month, we're like, now what? Here's the worst part about it. Everything we thought was going to get cured doesn't change at all. In fact, it actually gets worse. Now, when people hear that, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry that you made $1 million. I'm so sorry your life is worse. It's not that easy. Yes, it's improved safety, but it hasn't changed purpose, right? In fact, it took away purpose in a lot of cases. And it does a lot of things that, again, unless you've gone through it, you don't think about. And it's hard to even contemplate when you're not there. One of them is, hey, I just had an exit, or I just had some major event. Do I have to do it again? The answer is yes every single time, and it's the wrong answer. Every single person says, no matter what they did, hey, I had this big exit. I've got to at least do that much again. My question to them is, a lot of my friends, I'm like, why? Like, you won. Here's why. Because it's what we're built to do. You don't get to that level, right? You don't Tom Brady or Michael Jordan to that level and then be like, oh, I'm just not interested in playing sports anymore, right? Those guys stopped because they had to, right? Because their bodies wouldn't let them, right? They couldn't compete. But for the rest of us that can just go start something else, everyone eventually just starts something else.
Now, is it, when you're talking about that, do you mean they start something else with the idea of like bringing a new idea to life? Or is it always, hey, if I sold for 10 million last time, I got to sell for 10 million plus this time? Or like my goalposts are always shifting in front of me? Or is it just that I need a kind of way to let my creative energy out?
It's a bit of both, right?
Okay.
So part of it is it's an ego thing, right? We thought when we hit that milestone that hole in our ego would be filled. We could finally say with pride, look, I exited or I did X and now I'm good. I mean, it really comes back to just that piece of validation. But the other part of it is if you were built to be that successful, there's nothing inside you that's seeking to be idle. What you're talking about when you're having this conversation with yourself is, I want to be safe because I don't feel safe right now. Whether you express it or you feel it, it's there, right? So that's part of it. The second part is, I want to be validated. I want to feel like what I did has a lasting impression for my self-worth, for my validation. It doesn't. And the worst part about it is once you've done it, it stops being special. I always say the value of anything is the fact that you don't have it. And once you get it, once you get that success, you realize that it didn't change any of the things you were expecting it to. And it's really depressing, which is ironic.
Well, I mean, it's what I hear you talking about here is the idea that I'm expecting that something external is going to solve an internal problem that I have. Like, I don't feel good inside for whatever reason, right? I don't feel good inside. I feel uneasy or unsafe, or I feel like I don't belong, or that my ideas aren't worth anything, or whatever it is. And my assumption is, because I have some external validation, an exit, an acquisition, an IPO, what have you, and all of a sudden I'm in a different realm economically. That's not going to necessarily solve the inner weather pattern that's going on here.
You bet. And so there's some fundamental things that we all have that it's almost impossible to divorce yourself from. We're all insecure, right? We all have fundamental insecurities that come from a million different sources, but manifest in the same way. Very few of us feel validated. If you talk about founders, some of the most ambitious founders, take like an Elon Musk in our era, one of the most insecure people that's out there. But those things go hand in hand, right? That guy has to perform at his level to feel like he's feeding that hole. Right now, the truth is you can't. It never goes away. The farce, the idea we build in our head is that if I just get to X, that validation problem will go away. It will not. It'll get a little bit better, but it won't go away. But if you take that a step further and you say, and it'll make me happy, it will not. It won't solve that problem. Like I said, it'll solve safety, but it won't solve self-worth, and it won't solve happiness. People are like, sure it will. I'll go golfing all the time or do whatever the hell it is that people want to do. You can do that stuff now, just to be clear, right? It's not like there's this other world of leisure that like you can't access. Yes, you can't get on a yacht, right? You can't buy a $10 million home. But once you do those things, once you buy those things, you're right back to being yourself, right? Just on a more expensive yacht. If you aren't happy on a canoe, you're not going to be happy on a yacht. You're the same person, just on a more expensive boat.
Yeah, I've got a friend of mine who tells a story about when he sold. I think it was his first company, but he sold a company to Yahoo and got some gigantic payout. That day, all of a sudden, he's got another comma in his bank account. He is punching his car in his driveway because he's so furious and upset and worked up about whatever it was. So for sure, in that case, money doesn't buy happiness. But Will, let me ask you, through startups.com, through your work, you touch and interact with so many founders and CEOs and people who are building really great companies. Like if you just look at the types of organizations you guys work with at startups.com, it's a lot of companies that we know. It's like Roan and Athletic Greens and like really interesting companies.
Yeah.
Without talking about anyone in particular, how do these CEOs who are driven and successful and highly ambitious, how do they respond to this conversation about success isn't what you think it is, and there are other approaches here? Like, is this, I guess what I'm asking is this a mainstream conversation that we're having right now, or is this still really niche, or are we considered weird?
Yeah, well, I'm sure we're weird by default. Here's what I would say. There's what we'd consider the public conversation and then the private conversation. I'm very fortunate in that I get to have very personal, very intimate conversations with founders. That's what we do. We have those conversations, and I'm incapable of small talk. So when I'm sitting with founders, I just have to talk about this stuff. But across the board, all the founders I've ever interacted with, behind closed doors, are amazingly open and very transparent, and more so than people would think. And in every case, the story is the same, right? Like, in other words, I don't have like a whole bunch of stories. It's not like a 50-50. It's like a 98-2. And the two were just pretty balanced people going into this. Remember, too, in the startup world specifically, we don't attract normal people. Like, normal people would seek safety with a job, right? That makes total sense, right? Like, you wouldn't be like, oh, you know, it'd be cool. Let me go work on something, on a product that doesn't exist, in a market that doesn't exist, with people I've never met, with money I don't have, with almost guaranteed failure. Like, that doesn't attract a sane person, right?
Correct.
And so it's got a heavy filter toward people that are a little out there. And with that comes a tremendous amount of emotional pressure, of psychological pressure to achieve something. And when we don't get it, when we achieve it and still don't get it, we have a really hard time processing that. There's a recent podcast with Brian Chesky from Airbnb, the founder of Airbnb, where he talks about this at length. And he says, look, on the day we went IPO was the saddest day of my life, right? Now, first off, you're not going to do better than him, right? And he seemed like a pretty adjusted guy to begin with, if I'm being honest. I don't know him personally. We did an in-depth interview with him on startups.com. And, you know, he talked about coming from a very humble background. Like, his story is absolutely amazing. So you would think when he gets to that level, he's going to be awesome. And he's like, I'm not. And he talked about it very, very openly. So I don't think this is, I don't think it's a hidden conversation. I think it's more a conversation that if you ask, you're going to get the right answer. But not a lot of people are asking the question, hey, if I do all this, will I be any happier externally?
Yeah, and then there aren't a lot of forums for these types of conversations. So they're happening, right, but like you're saying, they're happening in private as opposed to really happening in open. Like everyone's doing the build in public thing, you know, out there on LinkedIn or what have you, but they're not doing the build my internal resilience in public in the same way. You know, one of the things that comes up so often is founders get so conflated. Their identity gets so conflated with their company, right? Like, it's like, who am I without my company? Who am I without that title of like, oh, hey, this is Wil, the startups.com guy, you know, type of thing, right? So, you know, you've done a lot of shifts in your life. You've also seen a lot of other CEOs do these shifts. Like, how does one navigate through this? How do you make sure you don't become your company and your job and your role?
It's damn near impossible. And I'm not saying it's impossible, because nothing is impossible. I'm saying that the very nature of what we do in building companies is an extension of us, right? I'll give you an example. At my kids' school, I teach entrepreneurship. And it's an incredibly well-attended class, not because of me, but because a lot of kids are really into entrepreneurship, which is awesome. In this particular class that I'm thinking about, I'm teaching 6th through 8th graders. So fairly young in the grand scheme of things, right?
Yeah.
But go 0 to 100 on their ideas. They've all seen Shark Tank. Like, they are so much further ahead than any of us were when we were starting. And the class that I teach is basically, I don't tell them this, but it's how to build a pitch deck, you know, startup pitch deck. And so we go through problem, solution, market size, et cetera. And we use that as a catalyst for their ideas. Now, the reason I bring this up is because by the end of that course, those kids who aren't in the place yet where they have the adult ego issues, right? But they're still people, right? You know, with validation. By the end of that course, every single kid in that room, every single time I teach it, is so invested in their idea. And that's a big part of what we talk about. We talk about ownership and agency. I want to teach these kids to own their career, their passion, their outcome. I don't really care if they start a startup, to be honest. I just want them to get a taste of what it means to build something that's yours, right? And kind of have that ownership. And you can be an artist and do that. You can be a founder and do that. There's a lot of ways to express that. But what we do in this process of building a company is we take total ownership of this idea. So it's not just a company we work at. It's not like we're punching our card at Walmart. We're saying this is our child, and I, as a father, I'm very mindful of that analogy. But it's very much an extension of us. It's hard to decouple it, which is the strength and the weakness of it.
And particularly when it doesn't work out, or particularly when you don't get what you're looking for.
It usually doesn't work out. Yeah.
I mean, most of the time it doesn't. Yeah. Speaking of that, one of the things that kills companies is scaling too fast.
Yeah.
And you've got some insights, some thoughts on the hidden costs of scaling and what that means. You're a pretty strong evangelist for sales, cash flow, revenue, survival type of thing over the hey, let's just build and scale this and then see where it goes. Yeah, see where it happens. Tell us how did that come about? Why is that so important to you? What have you seen happen there?
Well, yeah, okay. So imagine I'm the equivalent of a doctor in an ER, right? And so we have thousands and thousands of people that we're working with at any given time at startups.com. And again, I hear everyone's story. So, again, I'm the doctor of the ER that hears everybody's critical tale. And the truth is, I know better, right? I already know how that story is likely going to end. I'm not saying I can predict an individual entrepreneur's future. I'm just saying statistically, shit's going to go bad, right? And so when I think about that, in a founder is like, I want to raise a bunch of money and scale up. I'm like, I understand you read the story of Brian Chesky where that worked out well, but I've lived the other 99 versions for every one of those where it doesn't. So it's impossible for me to say, yeah, go do that and pretend like 99 times out of 100, it doesn't fail, right? So my whole thing is, let's build a path for you where plan A is self-sustainability, profitability, et cetera. And plan B is raise capital. And we run a capital raising platform in fundable.com. So obviously we believe in raising capital. And I've helped founders raise over $1 billion in capital. So I get the process, but I don't think it's something that you should put all your eggs in and push to the limit and say, hey, let's see how that goes. Because I got a million stories I can tell you where it doesn't work.
Yeah, and in my perspective, and I've only done this personally myself, and I've seen it a little bit as a mentor in Techstars, for example, where I've worked with a bunch of companies. One of the biggest issues with scaling too fast is you're not getting the right feedback from the market, right? Like you're thinking, well, I've got this, I've got these assets, I've got this cash, so therefore my job is to go spend it, as opposed to if you're coming in from a bootstrapped or cash flow positive business, you're saying, hey, I've got a smaller asset base, less cash to work with. Therefore, I'm going to put a much bigger priority on feedback from the marketplace. What's working? Yeah. What are people telling me? What's selling versus not selling, and so on. And that often will build a much more durable business than the whole idea of like, I'm just going to go put all the spaghetti on the wall I can find and spend all my time doing that and see what sticks. And lo and behold, nothing sticks. And I'm like, oh shit.
If I were to say this is the most consistent thing I've heard from funded founders, for those that did well and those that flamed out, it's I'll never do that again. And what they mean is I could have done that without sacrificing myself on the capital. And not that they all regret capital per se. They regret believing that they had to just get capital and there's no other way to grow that business, or they had to spend it as fast as possible and there was no other way to do it. Just once you've been through it a few times, you're like, okay, I get it now. I don't have to go out and raise capital as fast as possible. I don't have to spend it as fast as possible, even though all the investors are going to tell me to do that. You just get more perspective with it. But what sucks about being a founder is that most of the time we're doing it for the first time. So we're all learning for the first time. It's a big part about what you would be doing at Techstars or what I'm doing at startups.com is to try to shortcut, some of those mistakes and learnings to say, hey, slow down. Like, don't do that. Here's how to think about it differently. 1 million people have stepped up to the plate the way you have. Here's why they kept striking out. Don't do that.
Yeah, and to a large extent, the whole idea behind Conscious Entrepreneur is, to give people advice on how to be the CEO and leader and entrepreneur that they want to be, right? As opposed to
Yes.
just freaking out, running around like a chicken with their heads cut off, not understanding what the inner situation is,
Yeah.
right? Instead, coming together in community as a group to talk about what that development looks like. I think that's so important, and that's the magic behind all these accelerator programs and communities, is the fact that you can realize, oh, I'm not alone. I'm not the only person out there doing this, going on this journey.
And it feels very lonely. I mean, that is kind of the worst part about the founder journey, is that it is incredibly alienating, and it's a lonely process. And that's something that we've tried to kind of unpack for a very long time, to tell founders, we're in the business of showing you're not alone. More than anything, like, there's a whole bunch of things we can tell you about fundraising or scaling or hiring or whatever. But before we get into any of that, we want you to understand that you don't have to feel alone. There's a lot of other people that are going through what you're going through, and all the stuff that's keeping you up at 3 a.m, night after night. Every single person in this room is going through the same thing. It's not unique to you. You're not the one person that did something wrong and you feel this way. This is the way. This actually is the path.
Now, am I right that in addition to starting your own companies and doing the platform with startups.com, you've also acquired several VC funded companies? Is that right?
Yeah. So in my career in the past 31 years, I've started 9 companies, I've exited 5, and I've bought 6.
Okay. And tell me about the buying the company angle. What's that all about? What'd you learn from that? Was that a good idea, bad idea?
It was a good idea. It ended up working with a few caveats. My premise going into it, just so you kind of get a context for it, when we were growing startups.com, is we wanted startups.com to be able to do a lot of things all at once, like help you raise capital, help you acquire customers, help you find mentors, all the things that every startup wants. But we couldn't build all of those things and get critical mass in all of those categories at once. So I had this thesis. I said, I bet a lot of other companies have already built good products in all the things that we want to do. So let's see if we can acquire them. Now that sounds a lot easier or harder, I don't know if you depend on look at it, than it is. But here was my thesis. My thesis was, for every 20 venture funded companies, 18 of them aren't going to work out, right? Within those 18, and I've been there, that's why I know this. Within those 18, there's a small number of those that are actually really good companies. They're just not on a venture path anymore, right? They got to 5 million in ARR, and they weren't going to get to 10 million. At that point, it's still an amazing business. And if the founders hadn't raised money, which is what I hear about all the time, they'd be as happy as can be. It'll solve all their life problems. But it's venture funded now, and it goes into this purgatory of funding where you don't have enough traction or upside to go raise more money. And now you have a cap table loaded with investors, so you can't operate it like a for-profit company either and just take distributions, et cetera. And so it goes into this weird space. Those were the companies I was looking for. Really good companies that weren't going to raise another round, but had a lot of money invested in them. Because I had run those companies. I knew exactly what that was like. So to put that in perspective, I moved my family to San Francisco. I ran around, I was probably doing 15 meetings a day, which is a lot, meeting with every company I could. We did diligence on 100 startups. And boy, do you learn a lot when you go diligence on 100 startups that you're looking to buy. And we ended up making 6 offers and got 6 deals done. So I was happy to say that. But in each of those deals, they were great founders with great companies, but didn't know where to take them next. And so our whole point was, let's tie these boats together, if you will, and build something bigger. And that's what we did.
And first, that's an awesome way to do it. And it helps you to get to critical mass, basically to be able to offer a lot of services to your customers faster because you're bundling this in. How did those deals go down? I mean, presumably you're not offering the same multiple that a strategic would, but you also know they're not growing as fast as they would be. What were the investors like? Are you like, did you now take on any of that?
If you want to,
all of the above.
I was going to say, if you want to look for something that's more complicated than raising from investors, try buying from them. right? Because when you're raising from investors, they're both like, well, hey, maybe we're going to pay a premium on this valuation, but it could go up 20x, and that's always kind of what they're thinking about. That's why they make the investment. So you kind of negotiate on the same side of the table. When you're on the other side, when you're buying the company, the price is the price. Whatever they put into the company, this is what they're going to get out of it. And there's never just one of them, right? And anybody's given cap table. We had some companies that had 40 investors in their cap table, which isn't that unusual anymore. And every one of those investors has a lawyer, right? So, you just going through those processes is hellacious. But here's what I always told folks. This is your opportunity, the investors, to get a second outcome. You already know what the outcome is here, right? And the company's kind of at where it's at. But this is an opportunity to go back to the well to get your 10 or 20xer on the next pass. And they felt strongly about that.
I want to switch back to this concept that we started with around success. And, it's not just about you as the entrepreneur. A lot of this stuff, the tolls, the ups and the downs of building a company are going to affect your family too. They're going to affect people around you and just kind of your general environment and your ecosystem, whether you're married or not. You've talked a lot about kind of creating good structures with family and the non-negotiables that have to happen. How does a success outcome change how you change those relationships with your family? Talk to us about some of those non-negotiables and how you navigate that.
Well, my thing was within family. So I didn't have kids until I was 37. So a little bit later than some people do. That's less unusual these days. And by that point, I had been in my career for almost 20 years. Right. So that's an unusually long time. And I've been a CEO founder for that whole period, which means I was working nonstop. When people say this stuff and they give you the whole, I went to school, uphill both directions in the, 12 inches of snow. I actually did that. Right. I mean, I spent nearly 20 years where I never went to work or came home in daylight. It didn't even occur to me that you could. Right. Like when I went to work, it was 5 a.m. or something like that. It was dark. And when I went to home, it was like 10 or 11 o'clock at night. It was dark. And I just assumed that's the way it was. That is like unheard of now. I mean, in certain companies, yes, but that is thankfully a bit of a relic. But contrast that to now you're a parent and you don't get to do that anymore. You got to be home. And I'll never forget, this is how lost I was on that moment. Before I get into why it was non-negotiable, my wife calls me up, and this is like, right as my daughter was born, and she's like, "What time are you coming home?" And I'm like, "What do you mean? I don't come. It's only 6 o'clock. It's like it's at lunchtime, right? In the evening, right?" And she's like, "But we're gonna have dinner as a family." Now she meant like our little infant's gonna sit next to the table, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, "Whoa, I have to be somewhere." Like I know it sounds dumb that moment was what it took. I mean, you would have thought like everything leading up to that, I would have figured it out. But at that moment, I was like, this is my new focal point. And I was so engrossed with work, you can give a sense for like how what a difference that was. And so I sat down and I was like, this is a whole new chapter for me where it's not just about me anymore, obviously. Right. And I said, so I'm going to look back and say, if I can build something new, this is exactly the time I started startups.com, by the way. If I can build something new, how would I build it differently than all the companies I've done before where I benefit from it, right? Not financially, just as a human. Like this company makes my life better. Hopefully it makes money. Hopefully it creates benefits for our customers, but it can't make my life worse and I can't go back to doing what I just did for the last 20 years. So I set out some non-negotiables. One of those was the company can never impinge on what I'm doing with my family, no matter what, just non-negotiable, right? And I think that's part of our culture too. When people have, any kind of family issues or anything, I'm like, family first. Like there's just no questions asked. And I've never been in a position since then. It's been 14 years. I never been in a position where I look back and like, I really wish I broke that promise.
Right.
I was like, what was I doing for the previous 20 years? What a mess.
And so what are the other non-negotiables besides family first?
Okay. Well, let me set this up a little bit because I think this will help. When people go to start something or they get on with a chapter of their life, one of the things they always try to do is come up with new goals. And I would argue that's actually really hard to do. We can always pick a few, but it's almost like such a big amorphous requirement that it's almost hard to do. But you know what's easy to do? Talk about the stuff you never want to do again. People can rattle that stuff off real fast.
Oh yeah.
So here was my thought, and it worked. My thought when I was 37 was, and I was starting, this new company, was even if I can't figure out what all my big audacious goals should be, if I could just remove all the stuff I hate doing for the rest of my life, then I just would have nothing to complain about. And that seems like it would make me pretty happy. And to be honest, it totally worked. So here are some of the other non-negotiables. I don't want to work with people I don't like for more than 1 second, which ruled out investors. and I joke, like I've had great relationships with investors, but I didn't like the relationship. I didn't like the idea that I owed them something, and that fundamentally I just hired my own boss. I didn't like that. I also don't like being told what to do, which is why I'm a founder. And so the idea that someone else kind of had this leash on me to be able to say, here's what you can and can't do, made no sense. It was counterintuitive to being a founder. But back to the people I don't want to work with, customers came to mind. Okay. In 94, I started one of the first interactive agencies, and we had huge clients, and I'm very thankful for them, but I didn't always like working with them, if I'm being honest, right? Like some of them were just kind of jerks. And when I would sit in these meetings and like just get a browbeating from some client about something we didn't do, I'm sure it was our fault, right? So I'm not, casting blame. I'm just saying that I was like, I'm not enjoying this guy whatsoever, right? Like if I could just never have to sit across from this person ever again, I'd be so happy. Coworkers, right? This one coworker, let's say that's so good at their job, but they're just kind of a douche, right? I'm like, I just don't want to work with that person. I don't want to have to kowtow to that person. And by the way, if they feel the same way about me, I also don't want them to work here. Right? Like, I don't want to be despised by the people I work with every day. That's horrible. And so within the non-negotiables was just a simple list of things that that I didn't want to do. And over time, I was able to just one by one get those out of my life. And holy cow, the unlock of a lifetime. Because now this is my dream job. I just get to sit around and bullshit with founders all day, right? And I only do the stuff that I want to do. Now that said, I'll do the hard stuff too. I have no problem. There's no job at this company that I can't do or won't do. That is for sure. And I'm doing it every day. But it's because I want to do it.
Will, when I hear you talking about the non-negotiables and the things that you don't want to do and the places that you do want to put your energy and focus, it sounds to me like we're talking about real success there.
Correct.
And
yes,
this goes back to how we started this conversation, right? Which is it's a paradox. We all think that we're chasing something in the future. We think we're chasing some if-then outcome, that it's kind of out there. And in reality, real success, and this is true for founders or basically for anybody, real success is creating a life you want so that you can live it now.
Yep, 100%.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you for walking us through this paradox. Love what you're doing at startups.com. Love the way you are championing a full person, full body entrepreneur and helping to navigate the very perilous ups and downs of entrepreneurship. But Wil Schroter, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Appreciate it, Alex. Thank you.